Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Insider. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Samiullah. I'm so bad with pronunciations. Have I got that correct?
Very close, yeah. I'm Chris Samiullah.
Samiullah, perfect. Chris and I have been speaking on LinkedIn recently after I've come across his profile, talking about a lot of personal branding, which has really got me interested in reaching out to him. But Chris, would you like to start off by maybe giving everybody an introduction into yourself and what you're up to right now?
Yep, sure. Ben, thanks for having me on the show. So I'm a tech lead at Babylon Health. There I look after a team of about a dozen engineers. And in terms of my background, I've been working for 10 years and I've got a bit of a mixed background because I originally went to business school and worked in consulting for a bit before deciding to really focus on tech. And then since then I've followed more of a traditional software engineering path, which has spent some time in fintech, but majority of time in health and health tech. And yeah, I've become a tech lead and taken on engineering management and that sort of thing. And yeah, it's been quite an exciting journey with Babylon. You know, when I joined, it was about 200 of us, and now it's 1,500 and spreading
Phenomenal.
all around the world. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, Babylon, a company I've certainly recognised as a technology recruiter that do things the right way. I think in terms of technology processes, I know you hire some really good people as well, having known a number of business guys who work in the business. I guess to start off, I'm asking everybody a little bit about the kind of situation right now. So it's obviously unprecedented times. I've started this whole podcast off the back of, and that's the reason why it's called The Insider, off everybody being in lockdown. It's something I'm looking to continue now because I'm really enjoying it. I think there's a lot of value to be had. Where do you find yourself now in your team? What changes did you have to make, and how are you kind of looking at the landscape of the business and your team at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, for sure it's challenging, but we're fortunate in that Babylon already had a pretty remote friendly culture. So people would, before COVID, typically work from home 1, maybe 2 days a week. So at least people were somewhat used to it, but there's still been quite a change just in terms of ways of working, how people have to communicate. So I'd say that we've focused a lot more on over communicating, and we've had to introduce almost, like, it sounds bad, but sort of forced socializing sometimes, so that you can replace that water cooler chat, which otherwise you're just, every time you talk to someone on Zoom, focusing on a specific work problem, and you miss out on all those more sort of casual, getting to know people interactions.
Yeah.
And that's really important as well when new joiners. So we've had our first new joiners arrive at the company where it's all fully remote at the moment. So again, they have to schedule more time for communication. I've done a lot more one-to-one meetings on a more regular basis because you miss out on those interactions in the office. And I'm also pushing people to embrace more serious documentation. Things like decision logs and architecture reviews, so that everybody can see why we're making decisions. Because again, it's hard to just grab somebody and have a chat.
Yeah, I think again, it's quite common. I think with managers I'm speaking to, it's the softer conversations that you have around the coffee machine. There's some companies who've come up with some really kind of innovative ideas in terms of how they, do more the kind of socializing, and I think that the onboarding was always going to be the big challenge. And I think that some companies have done it incredibly well. I think that there's a few companies that are probably still learning. So I think that this is interesting to have these conversations. I think there's always something to be done off the back of having the podcast. I think a lot of businesses have learned a hell of a lot in terms of how they can be productive through, a situation from working from home. We all work in technology, so I think that it's fairly straightforward. How do you see us coming out of this? I mean, there's obviously a lot of lessons learned. Do you believe that I guess I'm interested in speaking to a technologist in terms of how technology is going to be helping us get back to normal as a society, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, but I think society in general is going to embrace the possibilities of remote working a lot more after this crisis. Although it's debatable, what after, and whether there'll be a complete return to normality. I think certainly for the next 6 months, maybe year, there's going to be something of like a bit of a halfway house, right? Where it's not completely back to normal, but people are gradually going back to the office, maybe a few days a week, these sort of gradual rollback sort of processes. But one thing I think it's definitely shown is that whilst there was like an initial unproductive phase, I think, where people were getting used to remote working, then after we got over that hump and people have got used to it, then people are being just as effective, if not more so. I think that's been quite an interesting thing to observe, particularly for the doubters, right? There were many.
No, absolutely. I think there's so many things that I'm hearing now regards to things like Zoom fatigue. It's something that I was quite interested in hearing the other day. My team, we worked longer hours, it seems to be. When we hit lockdown, we were working longer days and longer hours. And maybe you're looking to support your clients and customers, but I wasn't too sure why. But when you're scheduling a call, a video interview or a video meeting of any sorts, sometimes you're not allowing the turnaround time. So you get this Zoom fatigue, which is an actual real thing, where you're kind of not having any downtime. We finish one meeting, we go straight into another. And I think that this is but now we're learning from this, aren't we? I think, and I think that, bit by bit, we've become very, very efficient in terms of working from home. I think that it's taken a bit of time with most companies, but I think, again, the knowledge share has actually been really good and quite productive for everybody else. So one thing I was really keen to discuss with you on the show, and obviously why I asked you to come on board, was talk a little bit about personal branding within technologists. It's something that's really interested me over the years. It's something that customers are talking to me more about at the moment, and I know it's something that you've had a lot of experience in.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I really started thinking about this a couple of years ago when I launched my first online course. At that point, I started to see the potential, like as the online course launched, and I was doing more things like blogging and starting to do my first conference talks and that sort of thing. And it was very clear to see that more opportunities were coming along. It was good for my career. I met a lot of interesting people through that. Had some really good interactions and learned a lot, made some great connections. So it's something that I've given some thought to. And I think it's an area where I see a lot of engineers potentially neglecting. It's something where it's always tempting to say, okay, I'm just going to focus on the hard skills, maybe learn a new framework, learn a new bit of technology, and move the skill set from, let's say, a 7 out of 10 to 7.5 out of 10, when meanwhile, the multiplier effect of a personal brand as well as soft skills, they're still maybe at a 0 out of 10 or a 1 out of 10, right? So you can have, you can really move the needle with a relatively small amount of effort, I think. And obviously, if you want to have a big impact and really raise the personal brand, then it's about consistency, and we can get into that, the sort of the how. But I wanted to touch on the what first. What do we mean when we talk about personal brand? Because it's a bit of a strange term. I mean, what do you think of when you think of personal brand?
So obviously, personal branding is something I've really looked to embrace during lockdown. So my day-to-day changed. So I stopped. Well, initially we actually had a number of requirements, and we were busy probably for about a 4 to 6 week period where we went into lockdown, and then I had the opposite. We had a very quiet 4 to 6 weeks, and in that time I was really looking at how I could put my name out there. So when the bounce back comes, clients are aware of me. So I think from my perspective, a personal brand was to put myself out there, but to be seen as someone who's knowledgeable and someone who can actually help. And that we obviously started the podcast off the back of that, but that's not really, doesn't have to be a podcast. From blogs we started putting together. We started putting together e-guides for our customers on building data teams, things that are just different to other recruitment companies out there to try and elevate your profile. So for me, it's more about becoming a trusted advisor and being more in the public eye. Am I right along those lines? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're describing and talking about is creating value, right? And sharing that value with as many people as you can. I mean, I think a couple of decades ago, people would have talked more about reputation, right? In our internet age, where people are, publishing more and more, than we've used this term personal branding. But really, I think that's a combination of the branding aspect, which is how you describe yourself and how you package yourself, and then the marketing yourself, which for some engineers has negative connotations, but I'd say it actually can be a really positive thing if you're creating genuine value. Then that's how you get that package in front of other people and share the value that you're creating.
Yeah, I agree.
Together, when you bring those two together, that's your personal brand, and that's the multiplier that you can put on top of your hard skills. But I guess one important point is that a strong brand is not necessarily the same as a useful brand. Like McDonald's has a strong brand, but you're not going to be willing to go and pay a huge premium for a McDonald's meal, right? And in the same way, I think it can be useful for engineers to embrace the idea that people do want to put you in a box, and that's okay. So how do you guide them to it being a box that's good for your career and going to unlock interesting opportunities and grow your career? So I think articulating the value you can add is really important. So rather than saying, I'm a DevOps engineer, instead talking about how you can optimize fintech cloud infrastructure to save hundreds of thousands of dollars on AWS builds, right? It's quite a different way of presenting yourself. And you can put a personal touch on things, humanize it, talk about hobbies, so you become the cloud ops engineer who's the pianist and can save this amount.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. I think that's, from my perspective, when you're talking, I'm thinking back to, my first 10 years as a recruiter. I guess I've been doing this for 15 years now, and the culture would have been very different. We'd wear suits to work, and it's how, and it is about reputation. If you've done a good job, you might be recommended. I think we live now in the digital age we live. I'd rather be more human. I wear a t-shirt to work now. I talk about, I've taken up cycling lately, like I've something I'd never thought I'd do, and all of a sudden I think it's when people can feel a little bit more interaction with you and like you feel a little bit more normal, then I think that you're more likely to gain relationships or build relationships, should I say, and gain some trust. I couldn't necessarily. The Burger King's the McDonald's is a fantastic analogy, to be honest with you. But just going on again from what you're saying, I've had in the last couple of years more senior positions. It is more senior positions, so I don't know if that's a good, kind of benchmark to look at where what normal technical, kind of mid-level techie guys onwards might be doing. But I've had requests on job specs for anybody who has given talks, held events, anybody who has their own website and writes their own blogs, and I think that it's becoming more and more important that businesses like to have technologists who they can ultimately research before they come in for an interview. And I think that if you've got two candidates with similar CVs, you and I, we work in the same team, but I can see your website and I can see a talk that you've given, and I can read a blog that you've done, as opposed to they're going to interview you before me. So we're in an industry where there's a big war on talent, and from a recruiter's perspective or a client directly perspective who are hiring, there's an abundance of profiles out there, but it is working out and understanding who are the best candidates. And I think that sometimes you can get that from blogs and you can get that from videos before you go to technical tests.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of engineers, particularly those who've been working for a few years, know that there's a lot of jobs out there, right? People do receive a lot of messages on platforms like LinkedIn with job offers, but for the really interesting roles, the really interesting work, it's very competitive. And also, if you want to progress your career and move into more of the tech lead or the engineering director sort of roles, then it's really competitive, and it becomes at that point it's beneficial to have these additional advantages, these additional signals. I would say that I think it's possible to fake it a little bit in the short term when it comes to personal branding, but in the long term that won't work well, right?
No.
Because fundamentally what we're talking about is doing having impressive achievements, doing impressive things, and then telling people about them.
I agree.
So if you just focus on the sort of the branding side and blurting things out on social media, that's not going to work in the long run. But if you're genuinely creating value and working on difficult things and helping other people, and then talking about that, then I mean those are real things that you can point to and that truly demonstrate capabilities. And it's tough, right? Because in a situation where you've got two candidates who maybe are technically equally capable, then the one who's talked about their achievements and maybe helped more people is probably the one who's going to have the edge, at least on paper, right? I mean,
absolutely,
you've got to get through the interview process and everything, but the paper sift is a big deal.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's stuck. I'll go back to it. I think from my perspective, you candidates will be inundated with opportunities, but at the same time, a recruiter might be inundated looking at a data engineer, and it's understanding firstly the right kind of environments, the right kind of companies, and that comes with the experience of being a good recruiter. But then when you're breaking down to a CV, I'm learning Python myself. So again, through lockdown, again, it's just like it's a bit of self-development, and I think it will help me when I'm speaking to candidates. But and just from a Udemy course, but it's something that which I wanted to touch on with you as well. But it's something that I think it just adds a little bit more value, and that's the whole point. If you can stand out from other people by offering value, and you said helping others, then that's the differentiator for me. So am I right? So you actually do some courses yourself then?
Yep, that's right. So I have a couple of online courses which focus on machine learning engineering, testing and deploying machine learning models. Those have got over 10,000 students. And like I say, that's been a really eye-opening thing to have done and to continue to do. I think it's opened a lot of opportunities for me. But I would say that before I began anything like that, I had already started blogging and that sort of thing. So I'd like to think of the different levers you can pull and stacking up your potential activities so that you set yourself up for success, right? So this is sort of the how. How do you even get started with your personal branding? So I feel like there's almost like different levels of difficulty. And if people are watching this and thinking, well, how do I even get started? Then I think logical starting places are a simple blog, a personal website, and just picking a social media platform to start to really understand and feel comfortable with.
Is there one that you would recommend on that?
In terms
for
of
a software engineer or data engineer, or?
I mean, the go-to for so many engineers is Twitter. But I have a confession to make. I actually don't use Twitter. And it's possible that maybe I'm leaving things on the table there. And I'm sure there are some people who watch this and be appalled at even the content. But I think it's a genuine point. You want to pick a platform that works for you and that you feel comfortable with.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because otherwise you won't be able to be consistent on it.
Yeah.
That's super important. For similar reasons, I deleted Facebook quite a few years ago. Just don't agree with some of the things they're doing. And if I was to now like force myself to, try and build a brand on Facebook, I don't think I'd feel that comfortable with it. So I've tried to double down more on LinkedIn, Reddit, and then a few more niche communities, YouTube as well, for sure. Video is growing and growing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, podcasts is bigger than ever. So yeah, I think it's worth outlining some of the different levels, and then we can dig into some of them. Maybe podcasting, because that's something close to your heart. So I think that those basic initial levels, you have like your blogging, your personal site, and then initial social media, and then slightly more complex than that would be like venturing into video. So creating your own YouTube videos, where maybe you have to start thinking a bit more about equipment, but not too much. It's still straightforward. Creating a newsletter, building an email list, which is a very important thing to do. Otherwise, people just come to your blog and leave, and you never see them again.
Yeah.
And then things like this, guest posting on a podcast is. If you're a guest, it gives you a bit of a taste of what it's like without having to do all the hard work that you do as podcast host and creator. Which is why I'd put maybe at level 3, like starting a podcast or writing an ebook, maybe creating a mini online course, right? These are more demanding activities that you probably don't want to just start out with if you've not done anything else before, right? You want to set yourself up for success, and you have to pick the right level of difficulty based on your own experience. I mean, if you're already a social media guru and have got thousands of followers, then jump in at the deep end. Why not? Yeah, and then the last level, I would say, and then we can maybe dig into podcasting a bit, is talking about like major online courses. Things that are many hours long and do take a significant amount of time. High profile conference talks, like bigger talks beyond the small meetups. And then significant community projects, right? Things that either maybe have paid users or are highly used open source projects. So I feel like that's a rough sort of pyramid of difficulty when you
I agree.
looking at this and thinking, how do I tackle this whole challenge? Does that resonate with your own thoughts?
Yeah, so I think timing's obviously a big thing. So I think it depends what happens in people's personal lives. People with families time dependent. For me, I had more time during the day because I did not have as much work. So I'm not somebody who's going to sit around. I want to speak to people and want to offer some value. I wanted to self-learn myself. So these are the reasons. In the normal world, I don't think I would have had the time to do this. But now, especially when it comes to video editing, when it comes to everything else that goes with that, it's all completely new to me. Now, it's like anything. You do it, you get quicker, you get better. And now I will not stop the podcast. I will keep this going, but it's off the back of an opportunity that I had more time. And I think that's something that people have got to kind of, the level of difficulty that you're going to jump in at, that you're talking about, I think it will be dependent on the amount of time and how seriously they want to take it. I think, from the simplicity of doing a blog to, editing videos and even putting infographics, whatever might go along with videos. I've seen a couple of people do this recently. A great guy I forget his name off the top of my head, but I've seen a couple of really, really good ones lately, and I think that people are embracing it more. So I think it's becoming more relevant now, to be honest with you, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And although I rattled off quite a few things that people could be doing, to be clear, it's not as though you have to do them all, right? In fact, that would be potentially very overwhelming. I think if you're starting out, then you should pick something to stick at for a little while, see how you find it. Maybe something like creating YouTube videos, you decide that's not for you and you want to focus more on the written word and really double down on your blog and start to learn the basics of SEO, search engine optimization. These are skills that can really make you stand out as an engineer if you can start to pick up some of these marketing skills. I would say that it's definitely worth engineers, I think, having a personal site where you can just have a simple portfolio, and it doesn't have to be things that you do outside of your day job. You can even highlight things that you've done just on the job in previous roles, that sort of thing. I really think that's worth doing. And if you are going to blog, then the basics of SEO, like you should know what a canonical tag is and this kind of thing, just to make sure that you're not spinning your wheels and that you have like a little bit of focus. Consistency is always important, especially with blogging, and consistency is important for other random things as well. Like it's good to use the same photo everywhere, for example, so that people come to recognize you. I mean, I forget the exact study, but there's all these bits of research saying that people sort of encounter you and your brand sort of 4 or 5 times in different channels and different areas before they start to actually realize, oh, it's you, right?
Right.
And so sort of having those touch points can be beneficial.
Yeah, no, interesting, really interesting. So that's something that I don't do, so I should probably use the same picture. But listen, I really enjoyed this, and it's so different from other conversations that I've had, but it's something that's really important. I think that, and I can really resonate with it. Obviously, recently starting the podcast, and I think it's the podcasts. Anybody can message you or I. We're quite open to anybody who has any questions off the back of this. That's fair to say, isn't it? I think I don't mind giving advice from starting a podcast, and kind of the challenges that I have. But in essence, it's really simple. We're on Zoom. I'm recording Zoom. There's some great tech. I use something called Buzzsprout, which loads up to Spotify and to Apple when they pull their finger out. I'm just waiting for the Apple one, but hopefully I think I've been told that's going to be this week. YouTube, you can create a channel and just upload the video. It is straightforward, and I think a lot of people might think it's quite daunting. That the issues come into more identifying people to speak to, what you're going to speak about. And I think this is an instance I want to talk about different things and things that are relevant. So this is a classic example of that. But yeah, like I said, I think it's really, really interesting. I think it's something that I'm seeing more myself from my network, and it's something that I believe that clients are looking more for nowadays, especially when you're talking about kind of like the startup industries. I think that especially things within fintech, I'm finding a lot of companies within the fintech like more publicity around what their candidates are doing. So it really, really interesting. I know you've written a blog on this as well, haven't you?
That's right, yeah, and I think we can put a link to that.
Yeah, 100%.
People can read up more about the different levels I was talking about and some resources to help them get started.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be really keen to do that. I'll link those into the video. And of course, like I say, again, if anybody has any questions, you're happy to receive. Is LinkedIn the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, more than happy to answer questions. Yeah, I mean, how have you found the experience of creating this podcast?
Yeah, listen, I think for me, it was just something so new. It's something that was out of my comfort zone. So I did one initially with a guy called Mark Kitchen, who's head of technology at the Lab Bible Group, and we did a live webinar. And I'll be honest with you, it wasn't fantastic. I mean, people can look back at it on the YouTube page, but it was live, and I had chat panes with questions. I had the screen I wasn't familiar with. And it wasn't ideal, but the more engagement that I've had through the podcast, it's really good. I'm getting so much positive feedback. So I've really enjoyed speaking to yourself. I think this is a really good example of how everybody should be thinking about kind of their personal brand, if nothing else, and it should be on the radar. And I think that from a recruitment perspective, in the next couple of years, you'll see more and more of what I'm doing. And I think that it's important for people to maybe stay ahead of the curve, to be honest with you. So thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Like I say, we'll link the blog, we'll link your name and everything else so everyone can reach out to you in the comments on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, Chris. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
All the best.